Hi, and welcome in. I'm Sam Albuquerque. With me today is Kira Leadholm. She is the co-editor-in-chief of Redacted Magazine. She's going to be talking to us about her latest piece on the Chicago public transit system. Kira, again, first of all, thank you so much for being here with me. I just wanted to start off by reading the lead paragraph of your story in Redacted about the Chicago transit and a lot of the issues that come with it. So it says, quote, "It takes a resident of Inglewood, a neighborhood of Chicago's South Side, about an hour to travel to the loop via the CTA, which encompasses the L, the subway, and buses. By contrast, a resident of Edgewater, located on Chicago's North Side, can get to the loop in just over 30 minutes on the CTA. Both Inglewood and Edgewater are roughly 8.5 miles from the loop." To me, that on the surface doesn't make any sense. And I'm just trying to understand, you know, how something like this is possible for a large portion of the city's population. Like, what can you walk us through some of the facts as to how this is physically possible in a city like Chicago?
Yeah, so a lot of it boils down to the transit options that are available. But even before that, when I wrote this article, I really wanted to look into the historical factors that kind of led to this. I had a theory that maybe, throughout the 20th century, when the CTA was primarily being built, that there were probably racist undertones that, colored how these transit systems were built. And I couldn't find anything on that. I do know that things like the Dan Ryan went right through, like Bronzeville, which was a thriving Black neighborhood, and really like destroyed that economy. Redlining obviously made certain neighborhoods a lot harder to gain any sort of equity. But I couldn't figure out any intentional racist thought processes that went behind the building of the CTA. So beyond the history of it all, it really just boils down to that on the South Side, it's the red line, the orange line, and the green line, basically, and they have far fewer stations. They don't cover as much ground as the L on the North Side, and even the buses, anecdotally, at least I found, are a lot more unreliable. So because of that, the South Side just has a lot less access.
Yeah. Well, what are some of those? What are some of the reasons that there is such a large discrepancy between the amount of train stations in the north and the south? Because I would assume that, because the south side is larger than the north side. Just thinking about my experience within Chicago, is that one of the main reasons why that there's a discrepancy in the amount of stations to each side, or is there a different specific notion you can point out here?
Yeah, for sure. So that's a huge reason. I think what a lot of people don't realize is how big the south side of Chicago is compared to the north side. And just purely by counting stations, I was able to calculate that on the north side, there are about 15,000, sorry, I'm trying to find my data here. Yeah, so okay, so the north side is around 15,000 residents per square mile, and the south side has about 9,000 residents per square mile, and the south side is much bigger. So basically that means that the transit on the south side has to cover a population that's much more spread out across a larger geographical area. So that's one of the reasons.
You point out in the piece, though, that it's you would assume that because there's a larger amount of space within the south side, or a larger amount of area that they need to cover, that it should be a bigger, more robust transit system in the south side, but that's not the case. And that's one of the more interesting things I'm starting to think about when you point out that factor about not having any sort of racist undertones to the building of the CETA, and then you consider facts that kind of point to the opposite. Because there's a bigger space, there should be more stations, and there's not. But I want to shift a little bit over here to talk about what you really found through your research for this piece. What were some of the key data points that really painted the picture of this lack of available transportation options within the South Side neighborhoods.
Right. So, like I was mentioning before, just from my very cursory research, I was able to calculate that there's about, on the south side, there are about there is about one station per 3.5 square miles, or 31,000 residents. And on the north side, there's around one station per 1.3 square miles and 18,000 residents. So what that means is that there there's always going to be a station closer to you on the north side, no matter where you are, and that there are fewer residents accessing each station. So something else that I actually had to do a lot more data analysis to calculate is which of these stations are actually the most popular. And besides the major transit hubs like the Loop and O'Hare, the 95th Red Line station and some of those far south side Red Line stations are the busiest ones. And I think that that's probably because a lot of people have to come from far away to access any sort of transit that can bring them downtown. Um, so
Yeah, and that kind of feeds into this whole conversation about the L and how it is a disadvantage to a lot of people from the South Side, because when you point out how many people are using a smaller amount of stations, and you point out that specific number of 1.3 square miles per station, there's one station every 1.3 square miles on the north side, and it's every 3.5 miles. Like me just looking at it from a normal person's perspective, you're talking about 2 extra miles to walk to get to a station at certain parts of the South Side compared to the 1 square mile that you have to walk on the north side. And that could be really a daunting, sort of thing to face every day. Like I know I personally don't walk that much every day, so I can imagine walking, twice that direction to get to the train station, get back to the train, and get back home. So it's definitely an issue that a lot of people in those neighborhoods are facing. But let's shift over here and talk about some more of the research you did, and the data that you were able to come up with. It sort of seems like the problem can be easily solved by just expanding, the L and the CTA's footprint within the South Side. Is that something that is happening in Chicago now, or something that is on the books to happen in Chicago now?
yeah, I think that would be one big component of this, and the CTA is currently trying to extend the Red Line to 130th Street, which would be huge because that's 40 more blocks, 5 more miles of people that would have access to downtown. But it's not going to be completed for almost 10 years, and it's kind of still up in the air if it will be completed at all. Whereas on the north side, the CTA is already working on like a $2 billion project to modernize the red and purple lines, which definitely is needed. But the bulk of this work is happening around Belmont, which is right in the heart of Lakeview, a very white, very affluent neighborhood, as well as Lawrence through Bryn Mawr stations, which kind of span uptown Edgewater area. And my research didn't include the decisions that went behind these projects. So I can't claim to know, why the North Side project is happening and the South Side one isn't, but it definitely seems really inequitable. And I think something else that, you mentioned earlier, having to walk like 2 more miles to a stop. One thing to keep in mind is that people on the South Side just have fewer cars. I don't remember the exact statistic, but like people on the North Side can use their cars in addition to the CTA. And on the South Side, a lot of people just don't have that option.
And to get to that point, and I'm glad you brought up the point of the cars and the amount of, that kind of leads into the socioeconomic impact of something like the transit system being disappropriated to lower income, more African American or Latin American neighborhoods, and it sort of gets to me to the final point, and what seems to be the most important question I'm left with after reading your piece, and that is what impact does this have for the people that live in the South Side? Like, what does the lack of available transportation have in effect, other than just walking a couple more miles a day? But does it affect economically? Does it affect morally? Like, what are the sort of impacts that you found throughout your reporting, your research in this piece?
Yeah, so there are a ton of major effects of this. One of them is that it just contributes to segregation. Chicago is the third most segregated city I think in the world. It might be in the US, but when people the South Side is primarily Black and the West Side is primarily Latinx. And when people from these areas can't get downtown and they can't get to the North Side, integration is not going to happen. It's the same thing with people from the North Side who are primarily white, don't understand or have no realistic conception of what the South Side is like because they never go down there. So that's one major thing. Another one is just accessibility to jobs. People on the South Side, again, primarily Black, just have way longer commutes than people on the North Side. And that's not just to downtown in the Loop where, there are a substantial amount of jobs, but also in the suburbs. So if you want to get to the suburbs, which the most jobs are right now, the most like wage earning jobs are in the suburbs. And if you don't have a car, you have to get to the Loop to take the Metra, which will take you to the suburbs. You can't take, unless you happen to be near a Metra stop, like somewhere along the lake on the South Side or somewhere on the West Side. But beyond that, there aren't really a lot of options. So not having access to jobs is huge, and it just pushes that unemployment rate on the South Side even higher. And it's definitely one of the main reasons that unemployment is so much higher on the South Side. And then the last thing is, you asked me, it seems like this could be easily solved by just giving people more transit on the South Side. And I totally agree, but I think that there are a lot of metrics that you can kind of measure equity with. And some of the other ones are, the South Side is a food desert. I've heard the term play desert, which means there's not recreation areas, different things like that. There aren't hospitals. And so having access to those things is one step toward more equity, but we just need them on the South Side, right? So I think it's like a double-edged sword.
Yeah. And one of the key things you point out towards the end of your piece that I really, attached myself to was the point you make about job coaches advising, people from the South Side, applicants to new jobs, to not put their addresses. And to me, that really jumps out as an implicit form of, discrimination, because it doesn't necessarily discriminate a group of people, but it does attach a sort of connotation to where you're from as a poorer side where you're not having more access, and then implicitly saying that you probably can't get this job because you're a minority. And and obviously that's a little bit of a reach and more of an assumption and more of a perception on my end, but it's just something that anecdotally really kind of stuck out as a viable nugget to point out how difficult it is to get employment when you're living on one of these living in one of these areas that are so lacking of viable transportation options. But Kira, thank you so much for your time. I want to finish up just the way we started, and I want to read the last paragraph of your piece, because to me it really shows the impact of this issue in such a clear and concise way that really hit home with me. So it says, quote, inadequate transit doesn't only reduce employment opportunities, it permeates into every aspect of life. Southsiders who rely on transit have significantly less access to grocery stores, hospitals, schools, fire stations, libraries, parks, and COVID-19 vaccination sites. Living near a transit isn't a convenience. It's a necessity that can vastly improve quality of life. And that really encapsulates what I think this piece is all about, and what you're really trying to go after in your report. So I appreciate your time, and I appreciate your great reporting here, and I appreciate the words that you've left us with on this page and also in this interview. So thank you so much, Kira.
Thanks.
And like I mentioned earlier, Kira is the co-editor-in-chief of Redacted Magazine. You can go ahead and read all of her work and all of her team's work at redactedmagazine.com. Thanks for stopping on in. We'll see you next time. I'm Sam Albuquerque.